Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all who helped make this possible tonight. There are a number of people who have helped me put this together over the years, and especially graphics over the last few months, and I do appreciate it. And I appreciate this full house tonight. What a wonderful thing. Thank you, Pebbles, for helping us on a hands-on look at one very interesting part of Dugway Brook. This is a great evening for me to see the full house, but also because it's just about 5 years ago that I first came here with a colleague, Craig Semsel, and at that time we were publishing a book called Euclid Township, 1796 to 1801, everything that happened north of Cedar Road and east of Demington from 1796 when Moses Cleveland arrived to about 1802 when Euclid Township got divided up in a different way. But at that time, we had explored what the surveyors had to say about Euclid Creek, and they called it the Big Creek. It wasn't quite a river, but it was a major geographic feature in Euclid Township. And Euclid Township, by the way, was defined as the largest township in the Western Reserve, and that is why it went from Cedar Road to Lake Erie, had more than 1.5 times the area of a normal Western Reserve township. Okay? So we're all Euclideans in some sense here tonight. Now, at this meeting, though, we noticed an interest in the streams in Euclid Creek, but these streams, and I remember in particular a gentleman who came up afterward and said, I can't remember the name of his street, but he said, I live on a street and there's a swale in the street and I want to know what that is, what stream that is, where it goes, where it comes from. And that inspired me. So I must say that this talk is a product of the talk here, I believe in October of 2003 it was. And I think we've made some progress in that time becoming more aware of our streams and watersheds and becoming more attached to them. All right. And now that you're no longer distracted, could I have the next slide, please? All right. 3 things tonight, and the first is simple, and we are here because we love our place. And it's the city of Cleveland Heights or the city of South Euclid, Richmond Heights, Euclid, whatever it is, we're fond of our places, and we're becoming more fond, I believe, of the ground and water upon which we reside. Both are important. These days, it's the water. For the last, I want to say 10 years or so, 10, maybe 20 years, it's been water, streams, watersheds, and we'll get to local stream advocacy groups later on. But we're here because we want to know more and we want to do better. Okay? So we start out with, let's love our place. That's my goal tonight, is to get you more connected with, attached to Dugway Brook, Doan Brook, 9 Mile Creek, and Euclid Creek. And I want to do this in a way that's different. Oh, stereo. In a way that is different from many talks. I'm going to give you the biggest picture I can because I believe that we all need the big picture. We tend to approach our streams in terms of the stormwater problem or TMDL, total maximum daily load, and technical formula such as this or other things that are, I think, a little abstracted from the streams and the stream courses themselves, okay? So I'm going to try to give you the big picture in space and time. I want to say the flow. I'm going to talk about a long period of time, and humans come in just recently, but it is a flow, natural to cultural, you might say, and I believe we're at the point where we start natural to cultural. We've maxed out on the cultural, and now we're wanting to bring more natural back into the equation. So we'll end up with that tonight, managing the flow. Thank you. Next slide. And to start off on the concrete level, do any of you ever think about where Mother Nature may reside? Okay? She has her way around the world, but I'm convinced that when she comes to our area, the east side of Cleveland, the inner ring, she has a throne at Lyman Circle, which is there in the lower left, with, of course, Laurel School there. And briefly, the history of Laurel School began in Cleveland with Mrs. Prentice, the headmaster, but about 1900, Sarah Lyman took over, and she oversaw the move to Shaker Heights under the care of the Van Sweringens. And I believe that Sarah Lyman and Mother Nature talked a bit back in the early 1920s when this was set, because Lyman Circle is ground zero for these four streams I'm talking about tonight, and actually for two more. Lyman Circle, or at least the Surveyor's Square there, Green Road on the left, Soulgrave on the right, Fairmount on the top on the north, and Shaker Boulevard on the south, 160 acres there. 6 streams. Our Bluestone Brooks watershed, I'm going to talk about it as one watershed, plus the Cuyahoga has a stream that comes off the south part, and in the southeast corner, there's a stream that connects with the Chagrin River. So 3 watersheds, 6 streams emanate from Lyman Circle. It's a hallowed place on the east side of Cleveland. I want to convince you in the next 40 minutes. All right, so if we go to space, well, Lyman Circle is space. I'm going to be switching between time and space, and you might think horizontal and vertical. So here we are, the watersheds. And I could not distinguish between 9 Mile and Dugway for this map here, so we have them combined and a little bit that doesn't belong to it down by the lake there. But you see how these watersheds really do emanate from one point, and that point is Lyman Circle. And as I said, the Cuyahoga River has Mill Creek descending from, or to the south from Lyman Circle, an unnamed brook to the Chagrin River, and then Euclid, 9 Mile, Dugway, and Doane. And they start at a point, they tend to fan out, and then as they get toward the lake plain, they narrow down. You can see that with Euclid and Doane, but again, I can't distinguish between the smaller streams that are not part of the Dugway and 9 Mile watersheds there. But once again, that point is at Lyman Circle there, a very interesting place on the east, the east side of Cleveland. And in the larger picture of Lake Erie watersheds, we have 4 scales of watershed on the south shore of Lake Erie. That is 4 watersheds 4 scales that start at the divide, the continental divide between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. The first order of stream is the Cuyahoga order, okay, the largest. So that would be the Maumee, the Sandusky, and then there are a lot of smaller ones till you get to the Cuyahoga. The next one in Ohio would be the Grant. But remember, the Cuyahoga has its source farther north than its mouth. The source here in northern Geauga County, and it encircles this whole area. So the Chagrin actually sits in the big U of the Cuyahoga. And then, so Cuyahoga first, large order, down to the divide between the Continental Divide. And then we have the second order streams, which are the Chagrin, the Rocky, the Black River, Vermilion, that order. And then we have our Bluestone Brooks level, which are well defined on the east side of Cleveland because they drain the face, the north face of the Allegheny Escarpments. That's the third level. And then the fourth level, I may have made a mistake in there, the fourth level are the streams that just traverse the lake plain from the escarpments to the lake. Okay? So we're on, in the big scheme of things, a third order of watershed on the south shore of Lake Erie. Next slide. Okay, I want to talk about 3 stages. Back to time again, the vertical sense, and the flow of time. I'll break into 3 major categories, or have 3 punctuations. And the first one is the longest, the earliest. I'll call it simply the Bluestone. I'll step on some geologists' toes to simplify as I do. But this Bluestone and the Berea Sandstone, which we just visited, were laid down 350 million years ago in an environment very different from today. And then we jump ahead to what really gives us what we have today. Very different period, the glacial period, which starts for us about 20,000 years ago when the glaciers began to recede definitively. Okay? So everything that we see is quite young. It's actually a lot younger than 20,000 years. And then humans arrive, or Euro-Americans arrive, about 200 years ago to really start changing things. So those are our three scales. Next slide, please. And to look at this, how you can in the earth. I talked about Lyman Circle, and Lyman Circle sits 650 feet above Lake Erie, about 1,220 feet above sea level. And if you could take the base of the terminal tower and set it right on the lake, public square right on the lake, Lyman Circle would be equal just about with the cone, on top there. It's hard to believe, isn't it, that our streams fall 650 feet, the height of the terminal tower, from their sources to their mouths, okay? They're about 8 miles long, all of them, 8.5 miles long. So that is nearly 100 feet per mile for their entire courses. That is a foothill type stream. Foothill Appalachian, even foothill Rockies. That is not a Midwestern stream. These are not Midwestern streams in terms of their structure. Okay? And then the rock, all right? I have done this very simply, but the kind of, you see Berea sandstone and Euclid bluestone there, and you see how they look, and above and below them there is what I've represented as shale or shale mixed with mudstone, a very, very soft rock, but that you see in all the major cliffs around here, in the Chagrin River especially, Rocky River, and Euclid Creek, and Doane and Dugway as well. Now, our brooks are interesting for a number of reasons. The radial source at Lyman Circle, the steep drop, and then there's a break point in mid-descent, in mid-fall, and that's these two layers of sandstone. And the Berea is a little more massive, but the Euclid bluestone here in the eastern inner ring, from Cedar Hill to Richmond Road, is the more massive layer, even though it occurs in different layers. So it's the bluestone that gives us a break in the fall and gives us the very interesting topography that we see from here down to Forest Hill Park on Dugway Brook, for example. So we have kind of a sandwich with bread and bologna, and the bologna is hard. The sandstone is much harder, so when the streams wear down, they hit the Berea sandstone and then quickly hit the bluestone, and they're stopped until they can work through that, and then they fall quickly to the lake through the Chagrin, the Cleveland and Chagrin shale there, okay? So that's what we are vertically. Now let's try to tease this out horizontally. Okay, this is the shore of Lake Erie, and our streams kind of magnified a little bit, and then the colors represent elevation. They don't correspond perfectly to the stone layers, but the blue is actually where the bluestone outcrops, at least on the east side here. In this area here, this blue represents approximately where that bluestone is on the surface. Underneath, we have the purple and the brown out here. That's that Cleveland and Chagrin shale down to the lake. And then here is our Cuyahoga Shale or Cuyahoga Formation with Lyman Circle right here. So the sandwich gets played out in our high parts exist about halfway down the course. We have this ledge and then another drop, and that's the big drop is down to Euclid Avenue. And I'll come back to this slide and tease out just where our brooks flow and how interesting they are, but you can begin to see how they do radiate from the circle I put in at Lyman Circle. The big crevice on the right is the Chagrin, and then the Cuyahoga on the left. The lighter colors on this are the Cuyahoga drainage itself, okay? I've stolen this from another application, so it's not quite perfect. Anybody who can help me with these graphics is welcome to see me. Next slide. Okay, now how does the bluestone appear in the ground? It was Western Reserve University at the time, had a great geologist. His name was Jesse Earl Hyde, and he took photos all over the country. But since he was here, he loved these streams here. He took a lot of photos, and there is a geology student in August 1934 standing in a bluestone quarry on Euclid Creek, at the top of the Bluestone, he says. So we have the Cuyahoga Formation up toward the top, and the beginnings of the Bluestone, well, you see the massive stone there, down, and the boy is actually standing about in the middle of the formation. It goes down about that far below him. But you see how it does, how the Euclid Bluestone occurs as a number of lenses or sublayers of hard rock interspersed with shale. Next slide. And this is the Euclid Creek Reservation back in the early 40s. The top of it is in South Euclid. Now it's covered with homes, but you see then the light gray of the Chagrin Shale and the darker gray in the midsection of the Cleveland Shale, and then up on top is the Bluestone. So that is this blue area on the map that I just showed you, where the Bluestone actually occurs on the top in the northern heights, you might say, the South Euclid, Richmond Heights area, southern part of Euclid. Okay? And you see a little waterfall coming down from the top there. If we go to the next slide, you can see a big version of that. Now, this is not one of our brooks. This is Mill Creek in Garfield Heights, but you see the Bluestone there. It actually looks a little blue in this photo, and it's the shale underneath. So that is our capstone to the major waterfalls. Mill Stream Waterfall, you may know, at 46 feet, I believe it is the highest waterfall in Cuyahoga County, and the others are not quite as high, but nevertheless, they are very nice landmarks, features here on the east side of Cleveland. Okay, so that's basically how the streams tumble over the Bluestone. Next slide. Okay, and then this has been going on for 14,000 years, so we have, you might say, relict or abandoned waterfalls, like this one, which is in the Euclid Creek Reservation about where Monticello Road crosses. Fantastic thing. You wouldn't expect something like that here on the east side of Cleveland, would you? Okay. Bluestone on top, Cleveland Shale down toward the stream. Next slide. Okay. And Bluestone, we all know it as a name, Bluestone Road, and the Bluestone sidewalks. Cleveland Heights is full of Bluestone sidewalks. And a couple of very interesting buildings. This is Healy Hall, Georgetown University, built in 1877. It's a stone building. Not all the stone is bluestone, but the most decorative stonework is Euclid Bluestone here. Very nice building. And the next slide, of which I'm very proud because it is our Euclid City Hall of 1938, constructed of bluestone. Okay? Not many buildings were built entirely of bluestone, but a few. Okay, next slide. Now, so to sum up again, here we have our sandwich. Lyman Circle on top at 650, lake at the bottom, 0 or 570 feet above sea level, about the height of the terminal tower with this major break for these two beds, and as we'll see, the Euclid Bluestone does give the major break here. Next slide. Okay, now we have to come forward. I've given you the bedrock, but we must come very much more forward in time to see the brooks themselves develop. And what kind of animals are those? Those are woolly rhinoceros, and they were painted on the cave wall. You see the name of the cave in the upper left-hand corner, Chauvet, in southwestern France. They were painted when this area was nothing but ice. There were no gorges of Euclid Creek, Doane Brook, Dugway Brook. There were no streams at all. There was a mile of ice here at 32,000 years when this was painted. The great thing about this cave, it was discovered just recently, these paintings are done with charcoal, which can be dated, and the dates all come out similar at 32,000. So this painting is more than twice as old as our brooks, as the Chagrin River, not as the Cuyahoga River, that's much older, but our landscapes are very young, much younger than we are as humans. Next slide. Okay. And just a brief bit about this. 14,000 years ago, at that time, the ice had retreated from southern Ohio, southern Indiana, for 6,000 years, and we were just getting the start of our Great Lakes. At that time, they were true glacial lakes in the sense that their northern borders were ice, not land. And they were high. You see Lake Maumee, the forerunner of Lake Erie, at 780 feet. 780 feet above sea level is just about the height of Mayfield Road here and the northern heights through South Euclid, Richmond Heights, okay? And so you have to imagine, you know, a lake up to the top of Cedar Hill, a lake up to the top of Forest Hill Park, Lakeview Cemetery. And that's what started this off. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll have to leave the microphone to go over. The story of our streams is the retreat of the lake to its present form and the clawing southward of our watersheds. So that gives you, here in this area, just the distance between, you know, Lakeview Cemetery, Forest Hill Park, and the lake. That's the retreat of Lake Erie. But the clawing southward of the watersheds goes, what, 20, 30 miles down toward Akron, maybe a little more, 40, 50 miles in some areas. So 14,000 years gives us this effect here. And for the next slide, we will go to what this first lake looked like about 14,000 years ago, right in our area. The Cuyahoga Valley is a pre-glacial valley. Okay? So the border, this is the lake at 780 feet, Lake Maumee, and you see it, there was this very interesting bay. Wouldn't it have been nice to be here 14,000 years ago to go fishing somewhere around here on the bay of this major lake? And our Lyman Circle is there. So it's only about 14,000 years ago that we begin to get then the workings of our present watersheds down here, and they follow the lake as it drops downward. Next slide. And there we have it today. So if I can leave the microphone again. Euclid Creek, 9 Mile Creek, not so clear, but clear as it penetrates its gorge. And then the two branches of Dugway, down through Forest Hill, down through Lakeville, and then Lakeview, and then the numerous branches of Stone Brook converging and heading down toward the lake here. Okay? So once again, most of this is just about 10,000 years old. Next slide. Now, let's look at a more modern version of this, not quite the sandwich, but what we have. Now, this is compressed, so the vertical scale is very high compared to what we know. But the heights basically sits above the sandstones, both layers, and is in this Cuyahoga shale, a soft rock. Okay? We have the hill behind Euclid Avenue, which we call the Portage Escarpment, and then the lake plain down to the lake. Okay? So what I'm going to talk about now makes these distinctions between the heights, the lake plain, the Portage Escarpment, and in general the Appalachian Highlands and the Central Lowlands, two very different geological provinces in North America that meet right here. And the technical terms are the Allegheny Escarpment and the Lake Erie Basin. The Allegheny Escarpment from Euclid Avenue, or actually from the lake, all the way up to the divide, all the way back to Akron, is the Allegheny Escarpment. Next slide. Okay, now, what do we have today? I believe that we have 4 significant landscapes that most of us don't know too much about, but we need to know them and we need to take care of them. So now we switch from prehistory to present, what we have today, and we try to filter out history in the next few slides. We have 4 landscapes. One, we've talked about already, the apical source and the radial drainage out from Lyman Circles. And then I want to talk about the ravines that we have up in this area behind us here, and the Bluestone Gorges, we know those well, and then our very interesting Drowned Valley estuaries at the lake. Okay? These together, these 4 landscapes, are the reason why I call these the Bluestone Brooks. These 4 streams have all these. No other streams have all of them. Okay? Next slide. Okay, apical source. I have to disappear. Lyman Circle, 1903, No Shaker Boulevard. So, South Woodland, Fairmount, Green, Richmond, just off the thing here. All right, and Euclid Creek, 9 Mile, Dugway, not quite reaching up here. Actually, the 2 branches of Dugway, west and east, and then Dome Brook, which has 2 coming right up to Lyman Circle, and then I talked about Mill Creek down and up to the Cuyahoga, and then the Chagrin River branch. Okay? So, trust me, this is a special place, Lyman Circle. The black circle is John Carroll Campus, which is nested between 9 Mile and Dugway Brook. Another very interesting place and another campus, another institution that's a little special. Not the ordinary, not the house, not the parking lot, not the lifestyle center, okay, but an educational institution. We'll get into this a little later. Next slide. Okay, satellite view. And you can, this is what you get here is mostly the trees. Lyman Circle. Okay? And I think you can see this where Dugway, 9 Mile, Euclid. Okay, this is a little harder to visualize over here, but you can begin to see even from a satellite that these are significant landforms emanating from Lyman Circle. Next slide. Okay, and let's talk about the ravines then. This is a same satellite view from a slightly different perspective. Once again, Lyman Circle, and I'll point out the roads. This is going to be Monticello, Wilson Mills, right? This is Mayfield, and and this is Taylor. So what's that? Severance. All right. Biggest gash in the whole view. But what you see is from our circle, we have this kind of midsection here where we have the wooded areas, and these are the ravines that we're seeing just right here, just south of Euclid Heights Boulevard, because we get to the stone, the hard stone right down here. The best example of one of these Cuyahoga Formation ravines is Belvoir Boulevard, north of Cedar to Mayfield. 9 Mile Creek has this beautiful ravine, but a number of others, and we'll see what these look like in history. Next slide, please. Remember, our area was smashed by glaciers, and so it's basically flat, but this is a view of Franchester, which is the Bolton estate, and Hawken, now the middle school there. This was made in the 30s, okay? There wasn't much there in the 30s. Richmond Road I have labeled, and then Cedar Road would be just to the right, okay? But you see, a relatively flat area because it was glaciated, ground down, but these ravines are sharp features in this surface. They're small to large. Belvoir is a larger one. Okay. Washington, Meadowbrook, those are Cuyahoga Formation ravines, heavily populated now. Next slide. This is one that is not heavily populated, and you see they're, in most cases, rather narrow. There's no floodplain down here. The streams are small, but the streams are rapidly cutting through this small rock. So they're steep, narrow ravines. Cuyahoga Formation ravines are a very important landscape here on the east side of Cleveland. Next. Okay, now we go to something we all know, and those are the Bluestone Gorges, and each of them has its head at a waterfall over the Euclid Bluestone, which I have marked with the blue rectangles. And this is the old mill at White Road and Richmond, or Chardon and Richmond. This is Anderson and Green. This is, well, it's now Monticello, but Bluestone in here, 9 Mile Creek. And then Forest Hill at Mayfield, and Lakeview Cemetery at Mayfield, and then Ambler Gorge, Ambler Park there. All of these have historic quarries for the Bluestone and the Berea Sandstone, and all have waterfalls, and you know what some of these look like. Next, oh, hang on. Now the very interesting thing here is you can actually see what we walked down. Remember, we walked down the hill, and I stopped us and said, we've just come over the Berea Sandstone. You see this line in the foliage. And you look at it, and it gets lost in here by the airport, County Airport. This is our hill here. This is, when you go down Coventry to Euclid Heights, that's the Berea Sandstone. Okay? That's wooded along here. Above Monticello Boulevard, you see this, okay? So this is, it's not a major feature, but it certainly is a significant feature in our landscape. The descent over the Berea Sandstone, and then the descent over the Euclid Bluestone here. Except in the gorges, which had cut through the Euclid Bluestone at these points. Euclid Creek, East Branch Euclid Creek, 9 Mile Creek, a little branch of 9 Mile Creek, and then Dugway East, Dugway West, and Dugway. Next slide. Okay, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful. This is Euclid Creek, main branch, over the Euclid Bluestone. Okay, so these are, these features are photographed all the time, but they're hard to get to. Next. And then we drop down into the gorges themselves. This is Euclid Creek, Jesse Earl Hyde, back in the 1930s. Wonderful shot. You'd think you were in the Genesee River or something like that. Yeah. Okay, quickly eroding. You see how the trees are growing as they fall. The shale is very soft. Next slide. And the mouth, this is the mouth of the gorge of Euclid Creek. Euclid Avenue off in the distance. Vineyard in the floodplain of Euclid Creek. Highland Road is crossing there in the middle. And it almost looks like you're in Germany with the vineyards there and the houses. About 1896, with the lake out in the distance. Next slide. All right, now let's go to our last landscape, which is the Drowned Valley estuaries. And you can begin to pick them out on this satellite view, but it's a little pixelated, so let's go to the real stuff. Next slide. How do these form? What are estuaries? Well, if there was a geologist here tonight, and maybe there are, might argue with me, do freshwater bodies have estuaries? Estuary is normally where you have a stream that goes into the ocean, and the estuary is where the stream water and the ocean mix, and it's the tide that mixes. The tide pushes water into the estuary, and the current of the river pushes it back out along with the tide 6 hours later. Well, we don't have that tidal effect, but we have the makings of estuaries on the Great Lakes, especially in Lake Erie's, for one particular reason, and that is that beginning up here, remember that this all starts about 14,000 years ago. The ice retreats and the lakes go down, but the mass of this ice, still a mile thick, is so heavy that it's weighting down the ground. And the surface here is significantly lower than it is today. I mean, by several tens of feet, it's lower. And what that means is that Niagara, Niagara, yes, and the St. Lawrence did not function as the drainage for these lakes. There were others. For example, this one, which approximates the Chicago River here, and then you have another one here 7,000 years ago that actually does go out to St. Lawrence, but not through our lakes here. And then even 4,000 years ago, you still have other things going on because the land is so much lower than it is today. Meaning to say that Lake Erie spent quite a bit of time lower than it is today, and our streams then cut down to meet the lake at the lower level. They cut their valleys down, and then the lakes came back up. We have what we call drowned valleys, and that is the ports all over the Great Lakes, especially in Lake Erie, are built upon drowned valley estuaries. Cuyahoga, Grand are the major ones, Maumee River, Sandusky River. Okay, ours are small, but they're here and they're significant. They're important ecologically. Next slide. Okay, and this shows them. This slide has the lake lifted up about 20 feet, so you see that the valleys are really drowned, just so you can see what's going on. The Cuyahoga has this marvelous estuary. Don't we wish the Cuyahoga had that much water in it now? It would be a great place. But you can see where you can see then the process that drowning a valley creates, or the effect that it creates. Next slide. Now, we have on Lake Erie one that is nationally recognized and is a National Estuarine Research Center on Old Woman Creek out by Huron, okay? And this shows you the structure of these in a pristine form. They all have a barrier bar. The lake waves wash sand across, and that holds in the water as if it were high tide, okay? And then if you have a flood, that barrier beach washes out, and you get the river water mixing with the lake. And then the next storm that comes, waves push in, and finally the barrier bar is reestablished, and you have a stable period. So it's tide-like, but not tide timing. Still, there's a mixing, and these estuaries are very important. If you turn around from looking out toward the lake at Old Woman Creek, this is what you see. A long stretch of the creek at lake level. Next slide to Euclid Creek. Back in the 1890s, this is what the estuary of Euclid Creek looked like, and interesting. A lot of rotting vegetation. In the old days, there would have been malaria down here, but nevertheless, ecologically very, very rich. Next slide. Okay, an aerial view from 1921 in Bracknell, 9 Mile Creek on the upper side, Dugway Brook on the lower side, and just to orient, Shoreby, Eddy Road, now Bracknell Place North, the old country club, now Bracknell Towers. Is that what it's called? Bracknell Place? Bracknell Towers. And anyway, so let's take a look at these estuaries presently. Next slide. Okay. This 9 Mile Creek is on the left, that little sliver that heads back from the lake. The one on the right is unnatural. That is the Shoreby Yacht Club that's been dug into Little 9 Mile, or Shawbrook, it's usually called. Okay? But that tiny estuary on the left that's been armored, that is, the banks have been, battened down with bulkhead. Next, but you see the mixing effect. You can see the different color of the lake water and the stream water as they're mixing there. Okay, next slide. Coming onto the mouth of Dugway Brook, which I just love because it's been armored with the remains of the country club. The country club, right? Am I saying it right? The Country Club of Cleveland, which ceased to exist, I think, in the 1950s or so. But anyway, from a boat, this looks like Crete or something, because you have the columns, the fluted columns of the clubhouse at the Lakeshore Country Club that are scattered hither and thither there. Let's go to the next shot. Okay, we look straight up, and you see some of this armoring. You see where the barrier bar is now. It's been forced way upstream. Okay, so it's been bulkheaded for quite a bit of length. There's not too much natural down there now, so the ecological function is much reduced. We can bring it back. Next slide. Now, let's go to our own era and take a look at how we have changed these streams from streams to sewers in 200 years. And I'll talk about 3 factors here in the flow of time. One is very important. It's motive technology, how we move Earth. We don't normally consider this to be a major historical factor, but I want to tell you that here on the east side of Cleveland, motive technology is what has changed our environment. The way we move Earth has really dictated how our streams have changed. And of course, the technology must be driven by something, so I'll talk about a management mentality that has changed over 200 years, and then something that you might be able to help me with. And this is when I talked about Sarah Lyman and Mother Nature, and I'll get more into this, but there is something that we all have that relates to water, and especially water in the earth, flowing along the earth, but entrenched, coming out of the earth, going in. We're close to it. And I want to call it a sensate attachment. And this is used in religious terms, it's used in other cultural terms. We have used it and abused it, and it's time to identify this and use it as a factor for reconstructing these streams, but we'll see how this factor has had its effect on these streams over 200 years. Next slide. Okay, now, there are 4 chapters in these 200 years, and let's start with the motive technology. The first period, when Moses and the guys arrived in 1796, their abilities were limited. Shovels and horse drags. You could attach a large shovel behind a horse and move some earth. Not much, but it worked. The big change came here in Cleveland in 1852 with the first railroad along the lakeshore. And, okay, that laid the rails, it got us around, but it brought in the steam shovel. And that was a major transition in our ability to move earth. Next one, automobiles, let's say 1910, Model T, all of that. And then you get the Caterpillar bulldozer. And that once again, changes it, makes us more mobile in our ability to move Earth. And then finally, the big one, the Ukes. Now, that's earlier than 1960, but it arrives here in 1960 with the first freeways. And then we can race with buckets of earth across the earth. And we can, well, next slide. And our management mentality, what comes along with this? Well, in the earlier period, what we did is follow the natural axes, okay? The settlers came out on the beach ridges. They came out Euclid Avenue because it was high and dry and level. Okay? They came down river floodplains because they were flat anyway and relatively direct, sometimes damp. But it was the natural axes that made the difference, and we, in that sense, were no different than the Indians before us who used the natural axes, and the animals, the buffalo and the like, that migrated along these paths. They were the same paths. And then with the railroads, we wanted to streamline these axes. Remember, railroads have to run on level ground, so beach ridges are very nice for railroads. Floodplains are very nice. The broken area up here in Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights, not so nice for railroads. Okay? So automobiles change that, and then our mentality changes. And no longer do we work with natural axes. We can go up and around them, under them, but we want to confine and refine nature. That's the simplest I can put it. And with our change to wheeled earth movers, it's cut the tops, fill the bottoms, make a platform, and build it quick. That's where we are today. Next slide. And then this most interesting, the sensate attachment. And for the first one, the attachment actually has a internationally recognized definition as the Second Great Awakening. And that's the origin of the Protestant mainline churches here. But that's when these churches were at their evangelical stage. You know, they were energetic, they were emotional about it, and there was a church planting movement, big time here, that was part of the Second Great Awakening, but it also involved, beyond the main lines, the Mormons and the Quakers, and a number of other groups that we know as the Oneida Colony and things like that in New York State. Okay? That's this period, about 1800 to about 1830, and that sensate attachment of a certain kind was brought in this religious fervor of that period. Interestingly enough, when we go to steam rails, the rails bring in European immigrants, okay, so it's not the old New Englanders, it's another group of people who bring Roman Catholicism, and they emplace themselves on these streams in a very interesting way, we'll get to. Then it changes with the automobile, and then we get people moving in from the center city, and they're flying, going away from the core. And I believe that this sensate attachment becomes, the mover behind private schools and, of all things, country clubs. And then in our period, we have the inner ring flight, and we have recreational facilities and our lifestyle centers and malls, okay? And so this is, now, nobody in Cleveland Heights would ever say, let's put a recreational facility in Forest Hill to keep people from moving to Solon. But essentially, if you look at it, that's when they're put in. The big facilities in these inner ring suburbs are put in the interstate period when people are beginning to move out. And they're kind of the way to save if you take the big picture here. Next slide. This is one of my favorite things. This is a map in the Western Reserve Historical Society. It's Euclid Township in its first guise. That is the map of 1797, divided up among the 41 surveyors. And somebody put in the Indian trails. Neff, Chardon, Nottingham, Hilly, Highland, Euclid, of course, St. Clair along the beach ridge, not much for Lakeshore Boulevard, but the great thing, Noble, Taylor, Lee, and Mayfield. These are trails that were here 200 years ago when people began to settle. And these are the easy ways around the eastern inner ring. They still are. They've been kind of superseded by the interstates, and they would have been well superseded by the Clark Freeway had it gone through. But this, if you look at these, if you want to somehow do that trek that's the height of the terminal tower from the lake up to Shaker Heights, these are the roads that you take. Lee, Taylor, and Noble, and then those other ones there, okay? So this is our, wind and hand power area. This is following the natural axes. Primary evidence for it. Next slide. And what did people do? How did they move? Well, they used shovels, picks. I don't even know if they had wheelbarrows. This is Lakeview Cemetery in the 1890s, and these are not New Englanders. These are probably Finns or Welsh or something here. But they're using the old technology. You can't do too much with that. You can't move this rock. If you quarry this rock down here, you can't move it very far. You move it to some place like this and build your schoolhouse with it, but you don't move it much farther. Next slide. So, for example, on Richmond Road, within a couple hundred feet of a quarry, is this wonderful barn that's made of Berea sandstone that outcrops in that area there. But it's all very local and pretty massive. Next slide. From the early period. Okay, now at the estuaries, at least one of them was intensely used back in from the 1820s, and in 1830 of all things to have at the mouth of Euclid Creek was a shipyard. Next slide. These are not actual ships built at Euclid Creek, but they are the size of ships built at Euclid Creek. 140 feet long, 3-masted, 400 tons. Okay, built taking advantage of these estuaries. The biggest things ever built on the east side of Cleveland, slid down the ways, pushed out the bar somehow, never to be seen again. They went away. Okay, so there's one of these that still exists on the bottom in the Straits of Mackinac, and someday I hope to get down to it. Okay, but again, an early use based on the forest resources and the creek resources right at the lake. Next slide. Now, let's look at this second Great Awakening, how it happens here from about 1800 to 1830. The earliest church in all of Cuyahoga County, it wasn't even Cuyahoga County at that point, was established on 9 Mile Creek at Euclid Avenue in 1807. It was called the Euclid Church. It was Euclid Township at that time, and it was built by a plan called the Plan of Union between the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians, who got together in New England and said, why compete with each other? Let's go together and build churches out here. And this was the first one in this part of the Western Reserve. The Western Reserve had more people in Warren and Youngstown early on in 1807 than it did here. And then the Shakers came to Warrensville Township, northern part, in 1822 and established themselves on Stone Brook. Okay? And the Baptists then came quickly after to Euclid Creek, the Methodists in 1829 to Green Creek, and the Disciples of Christ, one of these early evangelical denominations in the mid-1820s on Dugway Brook. Okay? Say, water, always with water, the early churches, the early pushing churches. Next slide. This is not the original meeting house, but this is the 1815 meeting house for the Euclid Church. Okay? Nice building, right out of western Massachusetts. Okay, this is Neela View, I believe is the street, or Neela and Lakeshore Boulevard. Still exists as the First Presbyterian Church of East Cleveland. Not the building, but the church, direct descendant. If you ever want to step into New England, go to this church and just ask to see the graveyard. You go into the graveyard, you're not in Cleveland anymore. You're in Connecticut with the bluestone gravestones, the death's heads, the weeping willow trees, all of that. Next slide. The Shakers. All right, I don't want to show a bunch of Shaker slides, you all know them, but I love this one of the man drinking out of Stone Brook in 1876. And their close association, their heavy use of both the bluestone and the Berea sandstone to build various buildings there in crisp white shirts. Wonderful. Okay, next slide. That's the Berea sandstone, by the way, up on top. Next slide. I have a picture of the Methodist meeting house that was built at Green Road and Euclid Avenue, Green Creek, in 1829, heavily modified over the years, but that's the last photograph of it, or the only photograph of it. Next slide. All right, let's go to a new chapter, steam power. We'll move ahead, but I'll give you some major dates here. The railroad actually comes through, called the Cleveland, Painesville, and Ashtabula Railroad in 1852. It's now the CSX. With that, the McFarland Quarry had a way to ship stone, or the McFarland family had a way to ship stone, so they opened up a quarry at Anderson Road, basically, and Green Road in 1867. And then already Lakeview Cemetery is established in 1869, a cemetery for the wealthy, coming out by train from Cleveland. The nickel plate, the other railroad, 1871. And then already in 1872, John Rockefeller donates his holdings on Doane Brook and then establishes Forest Hill on Dugway Brook a year later. Okay? He loved these streams, Doane and Dugway. I'll tell this later. Go ahead. So these are the steam years. The bridge over Euclid Creek, made of Euclid bluestone in 1850. Look at the steam engine, nothing like we would think. But this was, when I say the first railroads were early, and they streamlined the natural axes, but they didn't change them much. However, the idea of steam power really transformed our ability to work. Next slide. Quarry on Euclid Creek, using steam power, and actually the Euclid Railroad, which went in the 1870s then, up the hill, up a little stream valley, of course, Green Creek, up the hill to serve the quarries on 9 Mile Creek and Euclid Creek. But this is what you could do with steam that you could not do with picks and axes and wheelbarrows. Next slide. And the railroads brought the Europeans, who brought vines and wine. Euclid Creek, once again, the floodplain, a vineyard at essentially just south of Euclid Avenue. Okay? This was done by people who spoke German, not English. Next slide. Okay. And then, once again, people coming out, the railroads brought real wealth to Cleveland. People had disposable income, and those who had it thought about spending it leisurely. This is Eddy Road and Lakeshore Boulevard in 1874. Dugway Brook goes out to the lake on the upper left. And, well, it's been hospitality there for a long time, if you want to include. Does Bratnall Place have a restaurant? All right, it's still hospitality 150 years later. Okay, next slide. Lakeview Cemetery, once again, 1869. I tilted the map because I can't stand maps that don't point north. So that one now points north. And the magnificent place that Lakeview Cemetery is on the west branch of Dugway Brook, okay? It's a great place. It's an arboretum, it's a garden, and the geology is wonderful, okay? Next slide. And then the Rockefeller estate itself. And once again, John D. Rockefeller loved the east side of Cleveland, these streams. He lived on the west branch. He bought up most of Dugway Brook Doane Brook below the heights and gave it to the city of Cleveland. He bought as much as he could of the east branch of Dugway Brook, converted it into Forest Hill. Later, his family later gave it to East Cleveland and Cleveland Heights in his honor, and he was buried in the west branch of Dugway Brook. You know, he loved it. Next slide.
For those of us who grew up in Cleveland area, you may remember the most fantastic sledding hill was in Forest Hill Park. That house stood right at the crest of the hill.
And it was not built as a house. You know, it's a huge thing. It was built as basically a sanitarium. All right, next slide. Now, so John D. loved these brooks. I believe he was a little at odds with Mother Nature, and it's not always the best strategy. So he, talk about attachment. The sensate attachment, well, he really did rework it in his own way, and he had lots of people to do it. So he did change the course of Dugway Brook through Forest Hill Park. And much after the fact, this is one of his constructions. And the next slide has a similar view of how Mother Nature got back at him by tearing it all down, okay? So you can't fool Mother Nature for very long, even though if you're John Dee, you can make the attempt. Next slide. Okay, now, in this same period, the steam period, comes many Roman Catholics to the greater Cleveland region. And on the east side of Cleveland, there are two early emplacements. One, the first parish east of Cleveland, St. Paul, Euclid Township, 1860. And then the Ursuline sisters establish their villa, what became Villa Angela Academy in 1874. And we'll see these. Next slide. Okay. St. Paul on Chardon Neff Road in Euclid. Euclid Creek in the foreground, vines in the midground, and the church in the background. I could tell you this could be Germany, and you might believe me, right? Just the scenery there, the architecture of the wooden buildings there. But that is, that's this population coming from Germany and putting themselves in a place that was maybe similar to what they came from, but in any event, close to the flowing water and that which is attached to it, the vineyards. Okay? It's the sensate attachment. Next slide. Villa Angela, mouth of Euclid Creek just behind it, and St. Joseph Academy, later St. Joe High School. Now they've been recombined again, or they have been recombined. But, a wonderful educational facility very early on at the mouth of Euclid Creek, within 100 feet of the creek itself. Next slide. Now, another chapter, early automobiles. And things change quickly. The Model T, this is the 100-year anniversary of the Model T, and that really did change. Before then, automobiles were for John D. Rockefeller and a few other people, but this really changed things. So if we take 1910 as the threshold for automobiles, already by 1916, we're talking Kane and Cumberland Parks, Cleveland Metro Parks, first 1916, but really established in 1918. Rockefeller Park in Doan Brook, 1926. Forest Hill Park, a little later, 1936. Okay, Kane Park is what we know it today, 1938. And then I never did get to find when Belvoir Boulevard was converted from 9 Mile Creek Stream to Belvoir Boulevard that takes up the whole thing. But you see, it's the automobiles gave us the way to come out from the city and surround these things and begin to transform the streams. Next slide. I love the caption here. This is Dugway Brook. This is out of a planning book for Forest Hill Park. Erosion caused by floods during many years has created a most unusual and attractive effect in the exposed surface of the shale formation in many parts of Dugway Brook, and these features ought to be preserved as part of the landscape composition. Okay? This is the switch. No longer are these natural features, they're part of a landscape now. They're to be dealt with, and they're to be beautified and enhanced. Okay? That is a change in management mentality. Next slide. So here we go. The transformation of Forest Hill Park to what we know it today. Put that stream away, because although parts of it are pretty, the whole thing is not. And by this time, 1938, it's starting to smell. So that's the big reason for putting it away. Next slide. Oh, I love this at the lower end of the park. A bluestone waterfall where it should not be. But nevertheless, it's part of the landscape composition. Okay, next slide. And then the one that we all know so well, Rockefeller Park, Doan Brook, Martin Luther King Drive, they're quite evident, and Doan Brook itself, wedged in, and over to this side. Okay, that's the mentality, and now we have the equipment to put that into place. Next slide. So, what typifies this era, the early automobile era? Wow, this is so interesting. And this is when the Catholic population is growing, and becoming too big for Cleveland and wanting to get out. So the emphasis is to establish what I'll call mission campuses, at that time out in the sticks nearly, out in what's now the inner ring. And it starts with Lourdes Shrine in 1922. Prohibition has come in 1920. Vineyard on the banks of Euclid, winery on the banks of Euclid Creek has gone out of business. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd arrive from France with a lot of money. They buy it. Okay? Similar for the Sisters of Humility of Mary with the Rosemary Home on Green Creek. Sisters of Notre Dame, 1924 Euclid. Well, you see this, and I put in, it's shaded a little different because it's not a Catholic institution, but Laurel School in 1928 at the Apex. Okay, Sisters of St. Joseph, you may know that one on Chardon Hill. And then the Park Synagogue in 1950 does the same thing at the time when that population is moving out. Okay, and the last one is the Julie Billiard School in Lyndhurst. Okay, next slide. We'll see a few of these. The Lourdes Shrine, magnificent place. You know, trying to recreate a cave in the Pyrenees in Euclid, on the banks of Euclid Creek. Not bad. I like it. Okay, next slide. Wonderful photo of Notre Dame not long after it was built. Love the photo. Banks of Euclid Creek. Next slide. Laurel School, kind of drawing. Next slide. Park Synagogue, wonderful emplacement on a branch of Dugway Brook. Next slide. All right. Now we come to our era. You're going to love these photographs. Next, okay, let's talk about a few dates here. Lakeland Freeway, you know, I-90, Route 2, 1962. The freeway that never got built, 1965. In this period, the Lakeview Cemetery Dam, 1978. And then the sewers that we don't see, but we paid for over and over, and have replaced our brooks to some extent. Next slide. Now, here we have to pull the fire alarms and change our mentality, because you may know the first two men as naturalist writers and who have coined terms for the situation in which we exist now. Nature deficit disorder, experience extinction. And for those of, I heard this on NPR a couple of days ago, the new book by Dick Mayer, Why We Hate Us. The low-grade infection that we have about what we do, all of us. Okay. And so these next slides I'm going to show you are basically why we hate us. Next. And then I found this, T. Boone Pickens, who has a good plan. But here's his graph on the percentage of U.S. oil consumption coming from foreign oil. At the beginning of the interstate period, there wasn't foreign oil, 1960. By now, there's a lot of it. And so as you look at these next slides, try to think about how much foreign oil has been used to do what I'm going to show you, has been used to transform these streams, and how much the transformation of these streams has made a lot of people in a distant place wealthy. Next slide. All right, Euclid Creek, Nottingham. Well, in 1960, Nottingham wasn't much of a village anymore, but this is the Nottingham meander of Euclid Creek, and the scar is the beginnings of the Lakeland Freeway across Euclid Creek. And one of the interesting changes in management mentality is the change from let's bridge this creek to let's culvert this creek, okay? And Euclid Creek is the size that you can do that with earth-moving equipment, with ukes, okay? Now, the next slide I'm going to show you will be, the photographer will be somewhere just off, looking this way, and you'll see this tank prominently. You're going to see this section of Euclid Creek. Next. All right. The tank, Euclid Creek. Now, already it's been beautified in that early automobile management mentality with the armored banks. But instead of bridging it, dig another channel, put the triple culverts, pile it up, and that's that. Quarter-mile long here we have. Next slide. Okay, speaks for itself. Okay, stuff happens. But, but here is the south end of the quarter-mile long culvert through which Euclid Creek goes now. All right, so typical of that mentality. Next slide. The mouth of Euclid Creek looks like an irrigation canal in Arizona by now. But, you know, the barrier bar, long gone. Any estuarine function, or most estuarine functions, very much reduced now with this management mentality that's a product of the stormwater problem. Okay, get that water out there. Don't let that barrier bar hold it back by any means. Next slide. Okay, one of my favorites, the dam in Lakeview Cemetery, huge thing for the stormwater problem. For that part to, you know, to take that water that you people up here let go on your streets. Okay, next slide. And the not near so big, but Stone Brook, the retention dam. You see Fair Hill, the treatment plant. Baldwin Reservoir there, okay, in the background. Next slide. And everybody's favorites, Dike 14, the estuary of Stone Brook, which has been sheltered from the rain. You can actually see the stream course. That's the nice entrance right there. Okay, the Stone Brook estuary, sheltered from the rain. Next slide. And, I love this. This is our sanitary sewer system here, courtesy of Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. I applaud them for publishing this on their website. But, all right, our sanitary sewer system. East branch of Euclid Creek. Main branch of Euclid Creek, 9 Mile Creek. Dugway Brook. Upper Stone Brook, Lower Stone Brook, Giddings Brook over here, Lower Dugway, Lower Dugway, and then Lower 9 Mile and Euclid here. We have, for our needs, recreated our entire Bluestone Brooks watershed underground so we can treat what we put out of our houses. This is not even the storm sewer system, this is just the sanitary sewer system. The storm sewer system is almost as big now here. So, you know, we have done this. We have, at our own expense, had to make this watershed under our feet at great expense, and of course, it is very fragile, and we have to pay to keep it up to speed and expanding it all the time. So here we are. The end of the story, basically. Next slide. Oh, no, not quite. Now yes, let's go back to sensate attachment. So what are our mission campuses of the interstate period? Well, let's see. Next slide. Banks of Euclid Creek, the best thing going on the east side of Cleveland, Legacy Village. Yeah, and I mentioned it before, recreation facilities. Next slide. I picked this off the web, so I couldn't make it full size or it'll pixelate, but the Cleveland Heights Recreational Community Center, that's right, on the Dugway Brook Falls, just above the Dugway East Branch Falls, okay? So that, you know, once again, I'm being slightly facetious, but not really. You know, it's in the larger sense of our society. In the inner ring here, the kind of religious fervor that followed the sensate attachment during the Second Great Awakening played itself out. The Roman Catholic emplacement lasted longer and played itself out much bigger, but it's moved out. And we are, in our own era here, this attachment is not functioning well if it's attached to recreational facilities where you never get down to the brook, and to lifestyle centers where you never get down to the brook at all, okay? They're there. They're in the places that the old Protestants and the old Catholics and the old Jews came to, but they're not there for the same reasons. And that's where we need to change. Next slide. So let's cool down here with a cool picture of the Bluestone Falls on Euclid Creek. Basically, that's what I have to say to you. We come to the end of this great flow, 350 million years, and we end up at a time now in which I believe the interstate era is coming to an end, only because gas prices have gone up to the point where we do drive less. You know, there are fewer tax dollars for road maintenance. These problems will keep going. So I think we're forced to come out of the interstate era and go to something new. What that is, I don't know. It's up to us. But I think the scale is going to be smaller, basically. But there are arguments against that as well. So, next slide. All right. So, post-interstate awakening is what I want to leave you with. What can that mean for us? And in some sense, we have to switch from thinking about a stormwater problem to how we can restore and recharge, especially get water back in, the water that we give to our storm sewers, that we give to the sanitary sewers that used to go into the brooks, you know, decently clean. We have to rethink all that. And as our technology changes, because our energy sources changes, we may have some we may have some success here. So I'm going to end it here. I'll just end it here. I have a few more things I could show in the way that I think this might go, but I think it's wise to end it here and take some questions and see what we want to do. Thank you. Questions? Yes? The question is, where is the Dugway Estuary? It is immediately west of Bratenol Place, the double towers, okay? And if you drive Lakeshore Boulevard, Dugway Creek is labeled with a brown sign. The bridge is labeled. And it's my understanding that one of the conservancies, Western Reserve Land Conservancy, has just purchased, I think, 18 acres in the estuary area. Now, you know, there's recent building down there, so it's not what it could be, but basically there may be a change of flow in the Dugway Estuary. It is a very nice one. You know, I didn't show you some other things to indicate that, you know, in the last century and up until the country club came down and it was all pushed into place there, this was a beautiful place. Okay? Yeah.
What do you do when you're not lecturing here, and what's your name? Okay.
My name is Roy Larick, and I do a lot of things when I'm not lecturing here, most of which do not have anything to do with this, okay? I'm a Paleolithic archaeologist by training, and so the watchwords of my life have been, the older it is, the better it is, and the farther away from home, the better it is. And I grew up in Euclid. But about 6 years ago, six and a half years ago, I came back here. I had a chance to come back, and I did, and I've stayed here because I love this area. I've 2 weeks from today, I go to France and Spain, and I'm going to be visiting those caves with the animals in them. And I have favorite places on the earth all over. But I always come back here because this place, well, it's not southern France, but nevertheless, our area is very nice. I mean, the natural substrate, that's a terrible name to give it, but the earth that we stand on right here is a wonderful place. And I feel that I'm on a mission to give the big picture and try to get people to see it in a different way so we can move forward. It's all about the Brooks from here. Yes,
Can you talk about where we could go from here? I mean, I need to get left and
right, okay. Yes, I can, and I have a few slides to show, but let's take a few more questions, and then we'll go on. And it's getting late, if people want to leave, that's fine. Yes.
Yeah, I heard you before,
Mhm.
and I rode my bike up to Lyman Circle, you know.
Yeah.
And I say riding on a bike is a very good idea because you really get a feeling for elevations that you don't get in a car, or even walking because you're not going as fast. And I go up there, and it was very interesting. You can definitely see this is the high point, it's sloping down,
Mhm.
but I can't see how any water gets into these brooks. I mean, where?
Oh, it's all in the storm sewers.
It's in the storm sewers
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, there's no streams up there.
Because it's all artificial and you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do they even get any water at all? I mean.
Well, it's very simple. I didn't show you the map of the storm sewers, but the storm sewers go into the streams, basically. And so all of the catch basins are attached, all of the catch basins in this area are attached to a stream. There are some exceptions, but
So they're not, yeah, so
Yeah.
I was confused.
it's confusing. It's confusing, and when I go into the other slides, I'll make light of this. But the gentleman mentions that I gave a talk in University Heights. I love that talk because University Heights is a city that has no open streams, but they invited me to talk about their about their 9 Mile Creek and their 2 branches of Dugway Brook that they never see. Chris, yeah.
I noticed when you were showing the various pictures of the Great Lakes region that there were all kinds of lakes that had names that I had never heard of.
Mhm.
Can I assume that those are simply bodies of water that archaeologists would assign names to that have not existed for 1,000 or 10,000 years?
Right.
Stanley, I remember.
Yeah. The question is the slide that had the various names for the former Great Lakes, or antecedent lakes in each case. Each stage has a different name. Just by geologists give each stage. You know, when you find a beach ridge at Lake St. Clair, you can usually trace it along. So you understand that that beach ridge marks a beach of a former stage of Lake Erie, and you can't call it Lake Erie, so you give it another name. And so we have Lake Maumee, Lake Whittlesea, Lake Stanley, Lake Warren, all from here down to the present lake. And even the lower stage has a different name, Lake Arcona. Okay, yes.
As you talk about where we're going from here,
Yeah.
I want to specifically address what can be done and what plans there are to daylight parts of these streets.
Okay. Okay, we'll try that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's recently done. Mhm. Okay, I'll put that off. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question about, you mentioned Shaw Creek.
Yes,
That comes out at the Shorty Club.
that's right.
Where does that go up through the?
Okay. Yeah. Basically, if you drive along Euclid Avenue in front of Shaw High School, you can see a swale in Euclid Avenue, and that's basically the stream. It's under Shaw High School, basically. And honestly, I don't know the neighborhoods behind Shaw, but there are some ravines that collect a couple. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can see me afterward, and I can point you to some maps that might show this. Okay. Other questions? Yes. That is, under Meadowbrook, is the west branch of Dugway Brook. Yeah. East branch is Washington, basically, and the west branch is Meadowbrook. And the Meadowbrook branch then is well buried under Coventry and down into Lakeview, where it emerges just north of Mayfield, and is open then just about to Euclid Avenue. And then from there, it's closed all the way to the lake. And then the east branch of Dugway, Washington and Cumberland here, Forest Hill, it opens up for a little bit, and then that's closed, and they meet north of Euclid Avenue, almost to Lakeshore Boulevard. They meet and then go into the lake in one estuary.
It's open along Washington,
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
There has been some discussion among the powers that be down
Mhm.
along Stearns, behind Case Western Reserve.
Right.
Have you heard anything about that?
You know, no, I've not heard anything about that, but my feeling is that in the long run, none of us will live to see it, but in the long run, these streams will be opened. They'll be reopened. Okay? And that the water quality, to do that effectively, the water quality is going to have to improve greatly before. Okay? But look at it this way. Who would have thought 25 years ago that you would see the dams come down on Ohio streams that have come down in the last 30 years, okay? That's where it starts. That's really quite impressive. And the next stage will be daylighting. It will take much longer, be a much more difficult job. But if you look 200, 300 years ahead, I anticipate that people will have a very different sensate attachment, management mentality, and earth moving. You know, it'll be much more precise what we're able to do. Okay?
What was here before the ice ages? Where there's some salt under the
Oh, boy. That's even older than the Bluestone. That's distant geological history. That's more than 400 million years old, the salt, okay? That is, oh boy, down in the Silurian Formation, which is basically the limestone that we see in the islands in Lake Erie. It's a couple thousand feet under the ground here. And there was a period of time when the seas evaporated and left the salt. Okay, I'll leave it right there. Okay, if you want to talk to me afterward, that's fine. Any other questions? All right, I want to switch gears a lot here, and I do have a few slides that are oriented more to what we as individuals can do on a very low level, what we really can do that I think makes a difference here in what these brooks are. This is not what we think our municipalities can do. These are what we can do right now, and you're going to know them all, but it's important for me to reiterate them. So next slide. Number one, well, this is what our municipalities can do. This is not a very good example. I need help with my graphics, okay? You know, geographic information systems, the data available on topography, geography, hydrology, the data available are immense. Each of our municipalities in the development department, the services department, they have access to these data. They have the programs to run it and the computers to run it on. Anytime a city such as Cleveland Heights publishes a map, I believe it should have much more than the streets. The maps of our areas have basically streets now, no natural features. We should have our natural features. We should have, you know, either shading, as this map does to indicate elevation, or contour lines, as this does. It has the streams that have been mapped even underground. You know, Cleveland Heights has done a good job on this to actually map the streams underground. These should be on city maps so we know where they are and know what we can do about them. So this is simple. All these municipalities have the technology and the wherewithal to do this. We just have to demand that it's done. So, you know where your streams are. And if you know where they are, you can connect with them more easily. So that's number one. Next slide. Okay. 2, trees, the urban forest. We got to get it back. You know, we won't have a pristine forest here, but nevertheless, Pebbles has gone, but you know, a third of what we saw were native species. That ought to be 80, 90%. And we have planted trees to conform with our roads. We must think about planting trees to recreate an urban forest, okay, so our streetscapes. This is in Euclid, the lower left there, and you know, there's a big old pin oak tree that grows big branches. They fall down, people don't like them anymore. And they replace them with miniature flowering fruit trees. Well, that's nice, but we need our big trees. And the upper left, I showed you that slide before, something like it, that is, oh yes, that's what's happening.
Some, you can do
How's that? Okay. We need to be placing trees in more places, okay? It's as simple as that. And most of these cities are doing a good job of planting along streets and roads. But we need comprehensive plans for front yards, backyards, and we, ecologically, in many ways, energetically speaking, we'd be better off with a canopy over our heads. So that's number 2. The next slide. Okay, the watershed groups. These are really amazing. These are a few that I've just collected the logos from groups around, and the Friends of Euclid Creek have been really active now for more than 10 years. Great group. Stone Brook Watershed Partnership, up and down. Dugway Brook. Need more activity, but maybe it's coming. 9 Mile Creek is forgotten, but these kinds of groups do a lot to connect people and to, more than anything, to take the technical aspects of planning and present them to the public in a digestible way. They're very important for that. So these groups are important to support. Next slide. Okay. And once again, I'll take the Friends of Euclid Creek as an example. We were able to have these signs done at a reasonable price by the county engineer, and now they grace not only the creek itself, but we have these wonderful signs that tell you when you're entering the watershed. And it's really neat because you think, entering Euclid Creek watershed, what does this mean? But maybe the third time that you see the sign and you drive, you say, oh yes, I'm on a summit and I'm headed just slightly downhill into the watershed. That's a connection that we must make. Next slide. You all know this. These are important. We have to retain more runoff because these streams have gotten into these boom and bust cycles. When it rains, they flood like crazy, and when the rain stops, they dry up. Ecologically, that's not good. For our sewers, it's not good either. On an individual basis, we have to start retaining the water. And you know what's coming? It sounds kind of crazy, but already at the municipal scale, at the industrial or municipal scale, we have the technology in place to treat our wastewater and clean it to the point where we can drink it, all our wastewater. And that's happening in the Santa Ana Water District in California. They treat their water so it can be drunk. They put it out into a natural system just to get away from the idea that you're drinking your own waste. But we'll get over this at some point. And this will come down, I think, to a personal level. I see a time when nearly every house has a self-contained water regime. Okay? You recycle your water. Your rainwater, you collect and you let go gracefully. But in your house, the era of distributed systems, water in, sewage out, it's going to end someday. We won't see it in our lifetime, but that's where it's going. So this is a part. Next. And then, this is a very important one. I go to Europe a lot. These things are everywhere in Europe. Where are they here? I think they're even illegal in these municipalities. Okay. Okay. This is very important because, once again, we must retain runoff. And as individuals, we can begin doing this. I think that's about it. Let's see, there may be one more slide here. Yes. All right. Now, we're all tired. Your eyes will glaze to look at this. But we must take an inventory of our important landscapes. So, remember, our childhood formation ravines of Bluestone Gorges and our lake plain, those are the estuaries I didn't put on here. But, we need to know where our important features lie in each of our 4 landscapes here, because these are the ones that are in flux. So, Shaker Country Club is concerned about their course of Doan Brook. And they are they are restoring it, they're doing a decent job. Shaker Lakes, the green means there's work to the positive. The white means that lagging a little bit. Okay, Washington Meadowbrook, of course, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. Kane Park's a wonderful facility, but it covered up a whole stream to do that. 9 Mile Creek, Belvoir, Milton area, all housing. Oakwood Country Club, it's really so built up around it. And now, the reason why this slide becomes important right now, we're going to lose this one. And country clubs are not the best landscapes for streams of our type, but they're a lot better than big honking developments, and that's probably going to happen at Acacia unless, well, I don't know. That's a sad one there. Okay, so taking inventory and coming up with a rational strategy for dealing with these things as these major changes come up, like a sale of an entire country club. That is the last that I have. Okay? Thank you. Thank you very much. It's much easier to see into the past than into the future.